But I am fearful that the reports that we have seen may underestimate the full scale of the horror as further evidence and testimony reaches the outside world. Videos are still emerging, including of what appear to be protester corpses lined up in body bags outside a hospital in the outskirts of Tehran. The Iranian regime has called for a 3-day period of national mourning, but only for its security forces. No acknowledgement of dead protesters. Instead, the regime peddles its manufactured narrative of foreign manipulation and seeks to portray peaceful protesters as criminals and terrorists, all the while pursuing a brutal and relentless crackdown on its own people. It takes huge bravery to protest and to speak out in the face of this oppression, especially for women who continue to face and endure severe repression in their daily lives. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Kingdom condemns in the strongest of terms the horrendous and brutal killing of Iranian protesters, and we demand that the Iranian authorities respect the fundamental rights and freedoms of their citizens. On Friday, the Prime Minister joined with the German Chancellor and the French President in condemnation of this violence and to call for an end to the violence. It is a message that I have also delivered directly to the Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi yesterday, setting out the UK's total abhorrence at the killings, the violence and the repression that we are seeing, urging them to immediately end the violence and change course. And today, as the further reports have come through, the Minister for the Middle East, at my instruction, has summoned the Iranian ambassador to underline the gravity of this moment and to call Iran to answer for the horrific reports that we are hearing. But this latest conduct by the Iranian regime is no aberration. It is no outlier. Rather, it is all too in keeping with the fundamental nature and track record of this regime. Consistent with its previous conduct towards its own people, as we saw during the lethal repression of protesters led by Iranian women, following the death in custody of Mahsa Amini at the hands of Iran's so-called morality police. Or consistent with its destabilising actions towards its neighbours in the region, as we have seen in its backing of terrorist and extremist proxies of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of the Houthis, and militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and from Iran's barrage of missile attacks on Israel. And consistent too with Iran's malign global impact, whether it be in terms of weapons support for Russia against Ukraine or its nuclear programme. And consistent too with Iran's state threats activities on UK soil, posing danger to dissidents, journalists and the Jewish community here in the UK, with more than 20 potentially lethal Iran-backed plots over the last year alone, as tracked through the vital work of the UK's security agencies. So let me set out the action that the government is taking in coordination with allies in response to this consistent threat that the Iranian regime poses to the stability, security and freedom and to the UK national interest. First, on domestic security threats, we will not tolerate any Iran-backed threats on UK soil. In May, 3 Iranian nationals were charged with offences linked to the Iranian regime under the National Security Act in 2023, and I want to thank the police, security and intelligence services for their tireless work to keep us safe. Last year, we placed Iran on the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme to detect, deter and disrupt malign and undeclared efforts to undermine our democracy. We sanctioned the criminal Foxtrot network for the violent threats it posed against Jewish and Israeli targets in Europe on behalf of the Iranian regime. And we have geared up the UK's security infrastructure to better tackle hybrid threats. As Home Secretary, I commissioned the review by the Independent Reviewer of Terrorism Legislation, Jonathan Hall, KC, into what more needed to be done so that we could apply counter-terrorism style powers, including on prescription, to state-backed threats as well. And we announced last year that the government will take forward the recommendations so we can deal with all the UK-based threats that we face. Second, support for British citizens. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first duty of any government is the safety and security of our citizens, and my department is working tirelessly to ensure the safety of British nationals in Iran. I spoke yesterday with the UK's ambassador in Tehran about the vital work that he and the team are doing on the ground, and the FCDO is in contact with the relevant Iranian authorities regarding detained British nationals, and their welfare in Iran remains a priority. We are, of course, deeply concerned that Craig and Lindsay Foreman have been charged with espionage in Iran, and just yesterday, Minister Faulkner met with members of the Foreman family, and we continue to raise this case directly with the Iranian authorities. Third, the coordinated economic and diplomatic pressure on this regime. This government and our predecessors have continually raised human rights violations in Iran through the UN and international forums, including most recently, this autumn, resolutions calling for an end to the regime's reprisals against women, against journalists, and against human rights campaigners. But then in October, alongside our E3 partners, France and Germany, the UK triggered the snapback process, which saw the reinstatement of 6 previously terminated UN sanctions resolutions on Iran. We did so because of the repeated failure by the Iranian regime to comply with its nuclear commitments. On the 1st of October, we updated domestic legislation to reapply extensive sanctions measures contained in these resolutions, also going further by designating 71 individuals and entities in sectors which have links to Iran's nuclear programme. Overall, this government has imposed over 220 Iran sanctions designations since coming into office. And we are backing strong sanctions enforcement. Just last week, the UK provided support to the US's seizure of Bella 1, accused of shadow fleet activities and Iran sanctions breaches. And at the time when the sanctions were reinstated in October, I also urged the Iranian regime, even then, to change their approach, to work with the international community to comply with their obligations. I told them then that it would take time to fully implement the UK's sanctions, and during that window they should start compliance and engagement with the international community and end the deception and obfuscation. They have not done so. Weapons inspectors still have not been given access, and far from changing their approach, we have seen instead a reversion to the most brutal forms of repression on their own streets. As a result, I can confirm the UK will bring forward legislation to implement full and further sanctions and sectoral measures. The UK has already designated key players in Iran's oil, energy, nuclear and financial systems. Further measures will target finance, energy, transport, software and other significant industries which are advancing Iranian nuclear escalation. And we will work further with the EU and other partners to explore what additional measures might now be needed in response to developments. And I also send a message to other countries who have sought to avoid implementing UN sanctions or to undermine the legitimacy of the UN sanctions reinstated following the snapback process, because no one should be supporting the kind of approach the Iranian regime is currently taking, and all member states should be fulfilling their UN obligations on such a grave and serious issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me say something else about the events in recent days. Just as they did in 2022, it's absolutely clear that the Iranian regime are trying to paint these protests as the result of foreign influence and instigation. They're using that accusation to try and whip up opposition to the protests amongst anti-Western Iranians and try to justify their vicious and sickening attacks on the ordinary civilians marching in the streets. These are nothing but lies and propaganda being spread by a desperate regime. They must not be allowed to undermine a genuine grassroots movement, drawing together people from all parts of Iranian society and spreading across multiple cities and regions. And that is why we and other governments across the world are determined not to play into the hands of the regime or to allow our words or actions to be twisted to support their lies and propaganda. And with a functioning embassy on the ground in Tehran and British nationals being held in Iranian jails, we recognise that responsibility, as previous governments have always done. In the last 18 months, we have taken stronger action to tackle Iranian threats at home and abroad than any recent government, and we have done so with broad cross-party support. That must continue. The world is watching Iran, and the UK will continue to confront the regime's lies, to call out its repression, and to take the steps necessary to protect the UK's interests. I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for sight of her statement earlier on. Every day for the last 2 weeks across Iran, we have seen brave and courageous men, women and children standing in defiance of a cruel and barbaric despotic regime which has suppressed lives and freedom for over 5 decades. People are being arrested, attacked and murdered in the streets. It has been reported that over 2,000 people have now been killed in Iran, with one report even suggesting that the real figure is over 12,000, and over 10,000 have been arrested, according to the human rights activists in Iran. Towns have been flooded with soldiers to suppress protests, and hospitals are overwhelmed with the injured and murdered. Thousands upon thousands of Iran's young, like the 23-year-old fashion student Rabina Amini, have been shot, killed, buried by the side of roads as they called for a free Iran. And we've seen reports of executions due to take place for those arrested just days earlier. We cannot let their dreams be buried as we mourn the victims of Tehran's atrocities. These were ordinary Iranians doing extraordinary things, fighting for their freedom. We stand with those brave Iranians, we back their calls for freedom, and we join demands for the regime to end. This is a regime whose cruelty goes beyond the brutality we have seen in recent days. The theocratic terrorists in Iran have for too long threatened regional security, from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthis backed by Iran. They have backed Putin's war in Ukraine and China's campaign of repression. They have ignored demands to stop their nuclear weapons program as they circumvent sanctions. They're holding British nationals, Craig and Lindsay Foreman, in cruel captivity. Iran is a hostile state and a threat to our country, a threat to the Middle East and a threat to the world, and Britain must have the resolve to deal with them. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, where is the government's resolve to stand up to Iran, back those protesting and work to bring about the end of the cruelty of this regime? As Iranian citizens are sacrificing their lives in the fight for their own liberation, what message of hope and reassurance does the Foreign Secretary give to those risking their lives on the streets of Iran each day? What is being done to challenge the Iranian regime over the violence it's conducting? What is her assessment of the numbers killed and injured? It is right that the Iranian ambassador has finally been summoned, but why has this only happened today? Well, the Foreign Secretary says she's spoken on the phone to her counterpart. What was his response? And did she raise with him the Foreman case? And what was his response? The Iranian regime now claims to have the protests under total control. What assessment has the government made of this claim? Britain and this House should stand with those campaigning for a free and democratic future, and if change comes, we should be ready to support this change. Given the statements from President Trump, what discussions have taken place with the US administration over their plans, and are we aligned with the US and our regional partners? Are all scenarios being considered and planned for, including the potential of UK-US military bases to stop brutality of the Iranian regime? And if the regime is being weakened, what assessment has been made of the risk Iran in terms of retaliating and escalating plots to undermine our security here? Madam Deputy Speaker, last year the US and Israel took direct action to protect Western and regional interests from Iran's nuclear threats. The then government refused to give a view at the time on those actions. They sat on the fence in a feeble attempt not to upset its backbench MPs. As people fight dying for their rights and for democracy, this is no time for weakness, and Britain should be robust in cutting off the Iranian regime and removing the funds they rely on. So will the Foreign Secretary state what further direct sanctions, and I know she's touched on some of this, will be placed specifically on the regime and its key henchmen in particular? Will she confirm that no one from that regime will ever step foot in our country and threaten the security of Britain should they try to flee Iran? Why has it taken so long to implement the reintroduction of sanctions under snapback? And on the IRGC, in opposition, Labour said they would prescribe the IRGC, but they have not done so in government. It is incumbent upon them to share their reasons for not doing so with the House. The Foreign Secretary refers to the report from Jonathan Hall, which she says they will take forward. And of course, that was 8 months ago. So when is this coming? And why was Downing Street briefing yesterday that prescription would not happen? Will they be prescribed? Madam Deputy Speaker, this side of the House will work with the government in the national interest and in the interest of global security and stability to pass legislation and other measures needed to keep us safe from Iran and put maximum pressure on this despotic regime. So a suggestion for the Foreign Secretary. Instead of legislating for the £35 billion surrender of Chagos, will she use the time we have in this House to deal with the IRGC and Iran, the regime, and keep us safe, and even use the $35 billion to bolster our defences, because at this critical moment, Britain must do all we can to stand with Iranians, fighting for their freedom, and to protect them and us from Tehran's threat.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say I do agree with the Shadow Foreign Secretary in her condemnation of the brutality and the horrendous actions of the Iranian regime and the threats that it poses. I would say to her, she will know that when she was Home Secretary and when I was Shadow Home Secretary, we strongly supported the national security actions on Iran. In fact, I said specifically that I hope the House will be able to come together to support our national security and defend our democracy. And I would urge the honourable members opposite to see this as the same cross-party approach to defending our national security, but also the regional stability as well. Because the scale of the truly brutal and horrendous actions in Iran mean that we should stand together in condemnation of that action and also in the action that we need to take in concert with our allies, including on further sanctions, including on further pressure, immediate pressure on the regime as well. She asked for my assessment on the scale of what is happening. Like her, I have seen the reports that suggest there may have been 2,000 people killed, there may have been more. My fear is that the number will prove to be significantly higher because we are currently getting so little information because of the internet blackout that the regime has instigated, because they are trying to hide what they have done and the consequences of it. And that is why we are also talking to other countries about what can be done swiftly to try to restore some sort of internet access or phones communication to people across Iran as well. She asks about the Formans. I directly raised the Formans directly with the Iranian regime just before Christmas, and we continue to raise this case because it is a huge consular priority for us. And we are too also in close touch, not just with the US, but also with other allies across Europe, across the G7 as well, and looking further at what the sanctions measures are that we need to take. She asked about the snapback. She will know that obviously this had been a running issue for very many years, the non-compliance with the nuclear regime. The previous Conservative government had not taken the snapback action. We did take the snapback action. It was supported on a cross-party basis. I hope again that that will remain so because it was clear that that compliance was not taking place. And that work was done in conjunction not just with the E3, the France and Germany, but also with our US allies, many conversations with them about this as well. And then she also raised the issue around the IRGC, which again, she will know that, again, the previous government also had this issue raised with them over very many years. And I have raised particularly this issue about the legislation and the need to reform the legislation. And that is exactly why I commissioned the Jonathan Hall review, because I was concerned that legislation designed for terrorism threats was not applicable in the same way to state-backed threats, and we need to ensure that we can deal with the hybrid and state-backed threats that the country now faces. Now it needs the international community to come together on this. In the face of this brutality from the Iranian regime, we need that concerted action, not just around sanctions, not just around the enforcement of the existing sanctions, but also around the overwhelming pressure. We will pursue that through the UN. We will pursue that through every avenue we can. The world is watching Iran. The world needs to be watching, and the world needs to stand together against the brutality that we have seen.
Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the question now is, what is Donald Trump going to do next? And there must be many people in the Foreign Office trying to second guess what he may do. And the question is will we give support to Donald Trump if he decides to take action against the Iranian regime in what he would say would be in defence of the Iranian people? Or will we take the same position that we did in the summer, which was to give assistance when it came to defending American bases or Israel when the Iranians, or if the Iranians retaliate?
So she will obviously understand it is the US response will be a matter for the US government and the US administration as well, and it wouldn't be right for me to speculate on what, how and the way in which that they will respond. What I can do is set out the UK's approach around increasing the economic and diplomatic pressure on Iran, but also in calling on countries to come together to do so, because whilst a lot of countries have talked about sanctions, in practice we have not seen them enforced, and we need that concerted action together in the face of this brutality.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Like members across the House, I feel humbled by the courage shown by so many Iranians to stand up to the tyrants in Tehran. Bravery they also showed after the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022 at the hands of the religious morality police, a crime that showed the regime's particular violence towards women. It is abundantly clear that the regime in Tehran is utterly illegitimate in the eyes of the Iranian people. And it is deeply shocking to learn that thousands of protesters have now been killed by regime forces and that further executions have already been scheduled. Madam Deputy Speaker, at this critical moment, we must take all the action available to us to support these brave protesters. We must also make sure that those in the UK who campaign for freedom and democracy in Iran and members of the British Jewish community are safe here. I welcome the new sanctions that the government has committed to today. So in light of the grotesque efforts to brutalise these protesters, will the government now personally sanction Iran's senior leadership, including Supreme Leader Khamenei? I hear the Foreign Secretary's commitment to new legislation. When it is in place, will she now commit to prescribing the IRGC, an organisation committed to suppressing dissent at home and exporting intimidation to our shores? Madam Deputy Speaker, Iran's decision makers must be held to account for their attacks on peaceful protesters, and the UK must take a lead to ensure justice is delivered. So will the Secretary of State call on the UN Security Council to open an international criminal court investigation into crimes against humanity committed by the Iranian government against its people? And will the government commit to using the UK's satellite capabilities to record evidence of human rights abuses which could be used to support such an ICC investigation? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary is right to avoid giving the regime any excuse falsely to claim foreign influence. Yet we know Donald Trump has proposed direct US military intervention. Does the government consider this would be merited, politically and legally? And would it reduce or increase the risk to the brave protesters? As evidence of the violence being perpetrated by the regime continues to reach international media, the safety of British nationals in Iran must remain a priority. And so I welcome the Foreign Secretary's assurance that plans are in place to support British citizens in Iran, and I thank our ambassador and his staff for all their work.
Can I welcome the honourable member's support for the ambassador and his staff who work in obviously very difficult conditions, but can I also particularly welcome his support for the bravery of those who have protested and who now, we fear, have lost their lives as a result of their courage in the face of such a brutal regime. He asks about the processes of the future. We will take forward the legislation around sanctions, and I have set out measures in the statement that we will go forward on, but also to look further in conjunction with the EU at what further measures we can take. He will understand that that there are processes that we need to go through, both around sanctions. He will also understand that the prescription process is always one for the Home Office as well, but I do very strongly want to see them ensure that we have a legislation in place that ensures we can deal with the different kinds of threats we face, because it's no longer just about terrorism threats. Very often we face now hybrid threats and state-backed threats on UK soil as well. We are looking further at the satellite issues as well, as I have said, and we will continue to work closely with countries across the world, and we do urge the international community to come together in condemnation and action.
West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. People in Hornsey and Fry and Barnet have written to me in absolute desperation. What discussions has the Foreign Secretary had with partners to coordinate efforts to promote human rights, even in these desperate times, including the treatment of prisoners, many detained so brutally since last month?
Well, we have been having many discussions with our partners. On Friday, the Prime Minister put out a statement in conjunction with the France and Germany as part of the E3, because it was as part of that E3 that we took the action in the autumn on the snapback and the introduction of new sanctions on Iran. We also, in the autumn, had pursued action through the UN and resolutions around human rights, and particularly condemning the repression of women as well as journalists too. We will continue to do that, and it is the top issue that we are discussing with our international partners at the moment.
Morrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the technical issues around proscription are well understood, as they were understood by the last government as well. But 8 months ago, Jonathan Hall Casey offered a remedy to get around it, which is his statutory alert and liability threat notice vehicle. When will the government bring that forward? Because it's now urgent. And does she envisage it being used for the IRGC overall, or simply its constituent entities are particularly problematic, such as the Basij militia and the Quds Force?
Well, he will understand that I can't preempt the proper prescription processes that take place or the use of future legislation in decisions that need to be taken by the Home Office and by the Home Secretary. But I hope I have conveyed to him that this is something that I feel very strongly about, that we do need this legislation in place because of the nature of the complex and hybrid threats that we face.
Florence Shalami.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement this afternoon. And it's clear and it's good for us as a united House to send the strongest condemnation to what we are seeing, the little that we are seeing, and we know that there's a lot more. And the Foreign Secretary mentioned support for British nationals. Across my constituency of Vauxhall and Campbell Green, many constituents have contacted me, including one constituent who mentioned, in our household, my partner is Iranian. I've seen a fear in her family, which I understand given their experience. She fears for her family back home. And as her family here in Lambeth, it would mean the world for us if things could be better. So my son could visit his mother's country of birth without abduction. And equally for the mass shootings to now be against the perpetrators and the protesters to stop. I just wanted to ask the Foreign Secretary, she outlined additional sanctions. Is she ensuring that those sanctions are hitting the Iranian authorities responsible for this brutal violence instead of the innocent protesters who are trying to get their innocent points across?
My honourable friend makes a really important point about the number of people, British citizens who have Iranian family, who are deeply worried about their safety, but actually also for Iranian citizens who live lawfully here and have done so for a long time, who have also been targeted by the Iranian regime. On the point she makes about sanctions, I can assure her the UK does not sanction food or medicines, and it is very clear we make targeted decisions on how to ensure that sanctions focus on those who are responsible for the damage as opposed to the ordinary people.
John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that the attempts by the regime to suppress news of what is happening in Iraq by shutting down the internet makes the work of external media like the BBC Persian Service and Iran International all the more important? Now, given that journalists from both organisations have been attacked and threatened, can she confirm, and her colleague, the security minister next to her, that measures will be taken to step up the security of those journalists?
Well, I think the Honourable Member will see the fact that the Security Minister has come to be on the front bench for this debate just shows how seriously we take the threats here in the UK. He is right to talk about some of the threats that there have been made to Iran International, and I know he would join me in paying tribute to the work of our police, particularly our counter-terrorism police and our security services in ensuring that people are kept safe. And I would also pay tribute to the BBC Persian service. It is clearly independent operationally and editorially, but 1 in 4 Iranians have accessed the BBC Persian service to get the latest news despite being banned in the country. That shows the impact that independent journalism can have.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Iran is a remarkable country. It has a rich history and culture, and its people have been living under tyranny for decades. They are now fighting to rid themselves of their chains, and Britain is a friend to the Iranian people, and our aim should be to stop the regime massacring its citizens and to set the people of Iran free for a democratic future. These are messages that the people of Iran would welcome. The Republic has declared war on its people. They are being murdered in the dark, and we must be a force for light. Given the internet blackout, what is the Foreign Secretary doing to ensure that the people of Iran can hear her message and this country's message of friendship and support? And some Iranians are talking about the return of Reza Pahlavi. What conversations has the government had with him? Thank you.
Well, the point that my honourable friend makes about the need to restore communications is crucial. It is crucial for us to be able to find out the sheer horror of what is happening. It is crucial for the people of Iran to be able to communicate with each other, to be able to speak out, to be able to ensure that their voices are heard. Obviously, the future of Iran is for the Iranian people, but at the moment, the regime is not allowing the Iranian people's voices to be heard, and we need to see an Iran that does not repress the rights of women, that does not kill peaceful protesters or aid Russia's aggression or support lethal threats on the streets of Britain.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her statement to the House today. She is surely right that there are things we can do to help these desperately brave people on the streets who want their country back. Should we not make clear that the UK and all Europeans will impose every possible further sanction and restriction on this Neanderthal pariah regime? Should we not help break the communications blackout through Starlink and satellite and other technology and make sure details of the regime-led barbarity on the streets is widely known? And finally, as her colleague, the Honourable Member opposite, said a moment ago, we should stop ignoring Reza Pahlavi. His is the name that is being chanted on the street. He is not seeking a restoration of the peacock throne. He wants to help usher in a new era. And will she and her colleagues at least meet him?
Well, I can tell the Honourable Member, and he is right to condemn the horror and brutality that we have seen. We are talking about other countries about what can be done, for example, with access to Starlink, for example, to ensure that there can be some form of communications restored. We are also talking to our allies about what further sanctions and additional pressure and other measures can be applied. Clearly, for the reasons that I set out in the statement, the future of Iran is for the Iranian people to decide. But let us be clear, we need to see fundamental change, and we need to see an Iran that does not repress its people so brutally, that believes in the opportunities of its people for the future. That is not what we are seeing now.
Deputy Speaker, the hope of seeing the Iranian people fighting back for their freedom has turned into horror as we see the images of the body bags piled up. Over the weekend, my constituents have contacted me anxious because they're unable to contact their friends and family after the regime's imposed internet blackout. The regime is using this as a weapon to enforce silence so that the world cannot bear witness to the horror and slaughter of their own innocent citizens. Can the Foreign Secretary assure us that the British government is putting the strongest possible pressure on Iran's regime for their appalling human rights violations and the oppression of the Iranian people, and reaffirm Britain's steadfast support for the Iranian people in their fight for democracy?
I can confirm that to my honourable friends that we are continuing to raise through every possible avenue that we can, directly with the Iranian regime, but also through the different international forums as well, our total condemnation of what is happening, including as the horrors emerge with each day, which become more deeply disturbing and troubling. And that is why it is so important for the international community to come together and speak with one voice.
Thank you,
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, Iran is a remarkable country and its people are remarkable. But I agree with the Foreign Secretary when she says that the actions of the Iranian regime is no aberration. She was absolutely right to say that. Will she look at prescription of IRGC, as others have said? We prescribed Wagner. That was the right thing to do. Will she bring us more information about the targeting of the shadow fleet, which is crucial? And finally, will she look longer term at support for civil society, who will be crucial in any rebuilding efforts?
Secretary responds, we've got 6 hours of protected business for the finance bill, so this has to move much faster, shorter questions, and this will finish in about 40 minutes. Foreign Secretary.
I can obviously have set out my response in terms of the importance of changing the legislation around prescription, and also on the shadow fleet. We are working on further measures on the shadow fleet. He'll have seen the action that we have taken to support the US interdiction on the shadow fleet, and we will. He makes a really important point about support for civil society, because that is where the strength of the Iranian people lies.
Creasy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the scenes we've seen in Iran are heartbreaking, terrifying, and I fear just a fraction of what is happening given the media blackout. The Foreign Secretary says that the world must come together, and she's right. I understand her point that it is a matter for the Home Secretary about prescription in this country, but can she confirm, given the measures that are being talked about in the European Parliament, where they've banned representatives of the Iranian government from attending, that she is talking to our European counterpart about coordinating prescription measures?
Well, what I can also assure my honourable friend is we are certainly continuing to talk with our close allies, including in Europe, on the action that is needed. And we have also sanctioned the entirety of the IRGC and placed not just the IRGC, but also the whole of the Iranian state on the enhanced tier of FIRS. That also gives us the ability to place all sorts of other restrictions and to ensure that there is pressure in place as well.
Mark Pritchard.
Reassure the House that freedom and justice will remain at the heart of British foreign policy rather than the pursuit of oil and gas, how important that might be. And I stand with her in standing up for those who are standing for freedom in Iran, courageous, brave. Of course, freedom is not a Western construct. It is a universal right. It doesn't emanate out of London or Washington. It emanates out of the hearts of men and women across this planet. But can I ask her to draw upon the lessons of history going back to the 1950s and Operation Ajax, and of course the Shah and his family being referenced here today. But it's important that when we see regime change and changes of leadership in the Middle East, whether in Libya, Iraq or Syria, that we learn the lessons where we've made mistakes as a country, even though we stand by those in Iran today.
Well, the honourable member is right. There are many lessons from history to learn, but this, he is also right to highlight those core values around human rights, around freedom, around justice, and I would also say, frankly, around basic humanity when people are being killed in the most brutal circumstances.
Taylor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think it's very telling that in the past few weeks we've heard absolutely nothing from politicians from your party, from the Greens, from the Socialist Campaign Group, from the Stop Some Wars coalition? Where have been the marches and the solidarity of the Iranian people? You cannot claim to be a progressive and care about social justice if you don't want to see the total and immediate fall of this despotic, theocratic regime. And on that point, can I ask the Foreign Secretary if she will listen to the advice of the honourable and gallant member for Tunbridge, who I think the whole House will agree is a fantastic advocate for the Iranian people, in talking now with other partners, and I hope with Iranian activists here in the UK, about if the Iranian regime does fall, what we can do to immediately support the Iranian people to build a better future, just as we're trying to do in Syria.
Well, we want to see a better future for Iran. We want to see a better future for the Iranian people. I think we have to be clear, it is the Iranian people who are expressing that urgent desire for a better future, and the future of Iran must be in their hands. But we will continue to work with international allies in support of action against the brutality that we have seen. That is exactly why we are looking at these further sanctions measures.
Deputy Speaker, when the US President tells the Iranian protesters that help is on its way, which he has just done, does that include British help? Will the government rule out the UK taking part in any planned US military intervention without multilateral authorisation?
Well, as she will know, I cannot set out the US foreign policy approach. That is for them to do. What I can do is set out the action that we are taking, the further sanctions that we will be implementing, and the work that we are doing with our international allies on how to sustain and how to significantly increase the economic and diplomatic pressure on this brutality that this regime is showing.
Andrew Pakes.
Speaker, firstly, can I put on record my thanks to our diplomatic staff working around the world to support people during this difficult situation. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary what conversations the Secretary is having with our G7 and European allies about what more we can do to use new technology to record and capture and document the horrific abuses of human rights that are happening. So when the right moment arises, we can show our leadership in holding the leadership of Iran, current leadership of Iran, to account for the horrific abuses of human rights.
I thank the honourable friend for that question. We are already talking to our allies about how communications could be restored, and I will ensure that that further issue that he has raised is looked at as well on technology.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much associate myself with many of the things the Foreign Secretary has said, but may I ask her just to move beyond the hopes that people have that the regime changes. Recent NATO Parliamentary Assembly visit to the Gulf highlighted how worried those Gulf countries are about instability, and that it may not be one government that then runs Iran. So may I ask the Foreign Secretary what meetings and conversations are taking place for security of the whole region and those states that feel under threat if this regime is to fall?
The honourable member is right to raise the broader instability across the region that has obviously been fuelled by some of the actions by the Iranian regime, some of the extremist proxies that they have supported. But he's also right to say that instability in any country within the Middle East and implications that has implications for the Gulf as well can have much wider security ramifications, much wider instability, and we are very alert to all of those issues and discussing those issues with allies.
Dr. Ruperhaq.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After the false dawns of the Arab Spring and the Zindagi Azan movement, can I ask my right honourable friend to stand firmly with the Iranian diaspora here, many of whom came after the 79 revolution, against this brutal and repressive tyrannical regime, particularly those who are critical of that regime from here. The TV station Iran International had to move from its Chiswick headquarters because of kidnapping and threats to its journalists. It's all the more needed at a time now. It's in a fortress-like, undisclosed location now that there's a communications blackout.
Well, my honourable friend will be aware of my right honourable friend, the Security Minister's strong action that he has been taking around transnational repression, and that includes transnational repression from Iran, because people who live in the UK, people need to be able to feel safe on our streets, safe to be able to debate, to communicate, and not feel that they are in any way under threat from an overseas regime.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, we talk about political courage in this country sometimes. It pales in comparison to the courage that these young people are showing. People like Irfan Sultani, 26 years old, who I understand reports suggest is going to be hanged today alongside other protesters. I know these situations are complex and they carry political risk. Given the courage and the risks they're facing, will the Foreign Secretary at least commit to showing whatever political courage she can if opportunities arise to help these people in all sorts of different ways in coming days?
Well, he is right to talk about some of the incredibly disturbing reports that we have seen about potential executions. We are urgently calling for this violence to end. That includes the reports on executions. This report includes the reports on further brutality. It is essential that this violence ends. The whole world is watching these horrific scenes.
Thank you,
Madam Deputy Speaker. Given mass protests, blackouts, censorships of social media and an estimated death toll of 2,000 civilians in Iran, will my right honourable friend set out what coordinated diplomatic response she is pursuing with the US and Middle East allies, and what contingency plans exist should a dangerous power vacuum develop in the country?
Well, my honourable friend raises a really important issue about risks around instability, around what happens more widely. We want to see stability across the region. We want to see safety, not just for the Iranian people, but for people across their neighbouring states as well. The safety and the basic freedoms and humanity that everyone, frankly, should have a right to enjoy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the fact that, rather belatedly, 2 weeks later, there has been a statement in the House about the situation in Iran, and pay particular attention and praise to those women who have led the opposition to great sacrifice against a regime which directs its ire particularly at women. A warning that there should be to people in this country who want to promote Sharia law and Sharia courts in our own country. But the Minister has highlighted the impact of the Iranian regime on our own citizens and our own interests. What discussions has she had with the opposition to ensure that there is a transition from this repugnant regime to a friendly, democratic and peaceful regime in Iran?
Understood what I said earlier. Questions must be short. Foreign Secretary.
Let's be clear, it is some of the greatest bravery and courage has been shown by women in Iran who do face the additional repression in their very daily lives, and I pay tribute to their bravery.
Grace.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome the statement from the Foreign Secretary today, and indeed the condemnation, as I know residents in Exeter who are desperately worried about their family in Iran will be too. The Iranian regime is one of the chief exporters of violence and instability in the region, and of course, as the Foreign Secretary set out, we're not immune to that here too. Money and effort expended online in particular in order to undermine our democracy in this country. Can the Minister set out what this government is doing to combat the regime's malign activities in this country, including through the work of the new Joint State Threats Unit? Thank you.
My honourable friend is right to raise this, because what we have seen with the kinds of hybrid threats that we have seen is state-backed, including Iranian state-backed activity that sometimes includes proxies, includes interaction with criminal gangs and criminal activity, as well as behaviour that can resemble terrorist threats as well. And it's that hybrid nature that is why that we have been increasing the coordination to deal with the joint state threats, and why the Security Minister has been driving forward action in this area.
Oliver Dowden.
can all see the brutality of the Iranian regime, but does the Foreign Secretary agree with me it's not just who we're against, but who we're for? And if we look at the signatories to the Abraham Accords, Israel, the UAE and Bahrain in particular, they point an alternative path for peace and stability in the region. So does she agree with me we should be standing foursquare behind them? And while I'm at it, does she agree with the excellent point from the Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead? Does she think that those hundreds of thousands of protesters who came out in support of the Palestinian cause might come out in support of Iranian dissidents? I won't be holding my breath.
Well, I hope we can see the strong support for the people of Iran and for peace and stability across the region. I think it was significant that we saw so many countries come together around the peace process in Gaza, and we did see an international consensus build around that. It is still fragile, and there is much work still to do. Nevertheless, there has been an international consensus around that. We are stronger when countries work together, including standing firm against brutality and repression.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary will know that Hampstead and Highgate has a sizable Iranian community who are very worried about their friends and family in Iran. One of the questions my constituents have asked is, what is the FCADO thinking in terms of an official registration service for dual nationals who are currently stuck in Iran? I know the internet blackout makes this very challenging, but I'd still like to know what the Foreign Secretary is thinking in case the situation escalates and they want to come back to Britain.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the point my honourable friend made is one of the reasons why I highlighted as part of my statement that the key issue for the UK, and is why the work of our embassy is so important, is also about the safety of British nationals, and that includes the safety of dual nationals. So this is something that we take immensely seriously. It's why we support the continuing work of our embassy, and I pay tribute to the work that our embassy staff are doing to consider all of these issues.
Sarah Pochin. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We join the Foreign Secretary in her support of the brave Iranian protesters standing up against this brutal regime. But will she confirm that if the United States does take targeted military action, that she will join us in supporting them in that action? Secretary.
Well, I would say it's obviously for the US to set out their approach. I have set out the approach that we are taking here. I welcome the honourable member's condemnation of the brutality that we are seeing, not just in Tehran, but around Iran. I would just say to her that her party's comments on this would have more credibility in this area if they also spoke with the same strength of feeling about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, especially given the close links, the close and disturbing links between Iran and Russia that are one of the most troubling aspects of the Iranian regime, and that is why we should stand firm on all of these issues, and I'm disappointed she was.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Reform Party should note that the Iranian regime they've decided to be against very much support their Russian friends with the Shahed drone. They should note that. My question is this to the Foreign Secretary. Firstly, I welcome the news that we are working with allies to discuss using Starlink to overcome some of the communication barriers. Specific question around UK, British, Iranian community trying to donate to people back in Iran. They can't because of sanctions. Can you just assure me and assure the House that you are looking at the specific problem for how British Iranian community can donate back to Iran? Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, you used the word you twice, and I'm not here to respond to your questions. Foreign Secretary.
He will obviously understand, my friend will obviously understand the importance of having an effective sanctions regime. Happy to talk to him further about the point that he raises, but as he will understand, the most immediate issue is how to try and support the re-establishment of communications and the end to the brutality that's taking place.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What assessment has the Foreign Secretary's Department made of the Iranian regime employing foreign militias from countries like Iraq and Lebanon to crush internal dissent in Iran? And if this is happening, what is the international community doing to limit this activity?
There is a wider issue of the impact of Iranian regime activity across their region, including supporting terrorist and extremist proxies, including supporting other organisations. This is something we are particularly sensitive to, and it is part of what makes this a broader issue about how we properly get peace and stability in the region, and that will continue to be a central part of the discussions going forward.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was in Balerno on Saturday, a constituent very politely reminded me that I had a moral obligation to be optimistic. Not always easy when you're Scottish, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker. But I do hope that what's happened in Iran does bring the international community together and really take action to deal with this horrible regime and bring it to an end. So I hope the Secretary of State will absolutely commit to that. That these murders are fueled by oil exports, 78 billion in 2024. To what extent can we reduce that in the coming years? I know we've heard about tankers being apprehended. Is there more we can do? Surely that's not just an event.
Well, as we've seen through the case of the Bella that was interdicted by US forces with the support of the UK, there is often a very nefarious link, including through the shadow fleet, between the Iranian regime, between Russia, and spread more widely as well. So we are continuing to increase pressure around the shadow fleet and around the kinds of broader threats that are posed.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The horrendous loss of life in Iran this week has to be mourned, as does the horrendous loss of life of Palestinians in Gaza over the past 2 years has to be mourned. The British intervened in Iran in 1952 and brought about regime change. Is she aware that external regime change attempts in Iran are very unlikely to work, will actually create a much worse situation, and will she give us an undertaking that Britain will not be involved militarily with either Israel or the USA if they try military activity in Iran now?
Secretary.
Well, let me say again, the future of Iran must be for the Iranian people. But we should also be clear that it is not currently, there is not currently any opportunity for the Iranian people to have their voices heard, because when they have sought to do so, we have seen this incredibly, just horrifying, brutal repression. That is why we are urging an immediate end to the violence and to see fundamental change in Iran.
I pay tribute to the people who've taken to the streets of Iran, particularly in the face of industrial-scale violence and repression from this regime, as the Foreign Secretary has stated. I would, however, on that basis and the malign influence that she has already acknowledged that Iran plays in the region and in the risk it poses to British citizens and particularly those of Jewish extraction and from the Iranian diaspora, that the government would move at greater pace with regards to the issue of prescription of the IRGC.
Well, what I can reassure my honourable friend is that we take immensely seriously the state-backed threats here in the UK, including the Iranian-backed threats against Jewish communities in the UK, against their own nationals in the UK as part of the transnational repression as well. And so we ensure that is not only why, as well as sanctioning the IRGC, as well as putting the IRGC on the enhanced tier of FERS as well, it is also why we have substantially increased the training for police forces across the country on state-backed threats, and this is something that our counter-terrorism police, who do an excellent job, take immensely seriously.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Right now, peaceful protesters who are unarmed are being gunned down on the streets, not just of Tehran, but every city and every town in Iran. They're being hunted down to hospitals if they're injured, or hunted down to where they live. The difference between 2022 and now is that this is a nationwide protest calling for regime change. And what people desperately want to hear, and I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement, is not more words, but actual action. We're told repeatedly that the Home Office and the Foreign Office can't agree on prescription of the IRGC. Could she therefore go away, speak to the Home Secretary and get this organised now as a demonstration that we're not going to tolerate this and we'll stand full square behind those brave people of Iran who just want liberty and freedom.
Well, I think the Honourable Member is right to talk about the difference being the way in which that this has spread right across Iran. We've seen small towns in different parts of Iran, as well as obviously the capital city itself. But just in terms of the issues around prescription, there is clear, strong agreement between the Home Office and the Foreign Office about the importance of making sure that we have the right tools to be able to deal with state-backed threats, just as we have for terrorism threats. That's what the Jonathan Hall review was all about. I would gently remind him that a previous government did not address this and did not change the legislation for many years. I know this is something that he has highlighted over many years, but I hope there will be cross-party agreement on the importance of addressing this.
Mark Seward.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Iran are courageously fighting against an oppressive regime for their freedom, and we all stand with them. The brutal response from Tehran, though, does highlight the need to take action against the IRGC. Now, I know it's been addressed multiple times during this session, but when does the government plan to bring forward the legislative framework proposed by Jonathan Hall that will give prescription-like powers to the government to deal with the IRGC and their malign influence in the UK?
Secretary.
Well, I think we should be clear. This is not just about the IRGC. This is about the whole of the Iranian regime. And we've looked at if you look at the brutality and what has been taking place. I have also, I think, set out the importance of us ensuring that we have a broad breadth of powers here in the UK, but also that we use the powers that we have, which is why the IRGC is already sanctioned and which is why their counter-terror police, precision police and security service already pursue any threat and any malign activity here in the UK.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker, Annette from Wincanton contacted me at the weekend, deeply worried about her extended friends and family living in Iran. She told me that many there feel they have nothing much to lose now as they come out on the streets to protest against the repressive Iranian regime. So at this really volatile moment, what measures is the Secretary of State taking to support ordinary Iranian citizens who are protesting against their government while holding the Iranian regime accountable for their repression and human rights abuses?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, here in the UK, as I set out in my statement, we have summoned the Iranian ambassador today to account for the horrendous reports that we have seen emerging further this morning that follows the coordinated work that we have been doing with our international allies to make clear the strength of our condemnation of the brutality, but also to pursue further sanctions and further economic pressure on the Iranian regime.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Foreign Secretary join me in firmly rejecting the instincts of some, including honourable members in this House, who blame the current situation on the United States, the UK, Israel, the West? And would she further agree with me that the blame for the current situation lies squarely with this oppressive regime in Tehran?
The responsibility for what we have seen and for potentially thousands of deaths, of killings that we have seen, lies squarely with the Iranian regime.
Dr. Ellie Chand.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement today by the Foreign Secretary, and like her, I condemn absolutely the repressive, violent, vicious crackdown on protesters by the Iranian regime, and pay tribute to the bravery of so many Iranian citizens who over so many years have protested, have advocated, have campaigned, have been on the streets calling for fundamental rights and freedoms for all citizens. I welcome the new sanctions against the regime that she's announced today. She also talked about sending a message to other countries that seek to break those UN sanctions. Can she say, is she considering other concrete measures against such countries who engage in sanctions busting, such as sanctions against them?
Well, what I can say is I think the action that we saw with the vessel that was interdicted by the US, that was an example of enforcement around sanctions. It was supported by the UK, but as we saw, that a vessel that had links not just to Iran but also to Russia as well. She is right that we do need to call on all countries around the world to respect the UN sanctions process, but also to realise this is not a time to be supporting this Iranian regime.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for her strong words today. I, like many members, have been contacted by constituents in Glasgow West very concerned about not being able to contact friends and family who are still in that country. But I would join with the right honourable friend in congratulating or applauding those female activists in Iran who've been relentlessly targeted by this repressive regime. And I do join her in applauding them who have been fighting very bravely for their freedom this week. And when the time comes, and I sincerely hope it does come very quickly, will she ensure that their voices and their actions can be part of building a new democracy in Iran?
Well, it is, I think, the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security resolution at the United Nations, which puts at its heart not just should we stand up for women victims of conflict or women victims of repression and persecution, but women's voices need to be heard as part of any positive peace and reconciliation process.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Not only is this despotic Iranian regime gunning down protesters in the streets, it continues to support terrorist proxies such as Hamas and Hezbollah. It provides drones to the Russian military in Ukraine and remains a very real threat to this country. So while I welcome the statement today, can the Foreign Secretary assure the House that the police and the security services have all the tools they need to keep Britain safe from Iran and its proxies?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can assure him that the police security services have our full backing in all of the work they do to keep us safe from state-backed threats, including from Iranian-backed threats on our soil. I think we also need to always look at how we need to keep up with rapidly changing hybrid threats to make sure that we can keep our country safe.
Lawrence Turner.
Speaker, and thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement. I echo the comments made a few months ago by my honourable friend. The regime severance of communications is adding to the distress of many of our constituents who are trying to establish the safety and personal liberty of loved ones. Now, I appreciate that there may be things that cannot be said in this place, lest they inadvertently inform the regime. But can she give the House an assurance that all practical measures are being explored to increase both the quantity and the quality of information going into and out of Iran?
Secretary.
Well, we want the people of Iran to be able to communicate with each other. And this is about the people of Iran. It is about their courage and their most basic rights to be able to communicate with each other. And that is what we want to support.
Isabel Roberts.
We are, of course, appalled at reports of thousands of state killings in Iran and support the fundamental right of the people of Iran to self-determination. President Trump is saying that help is on its way. There are also reports that the Prime Minister is set to accept a place on President Trump's board to run Gaza. Given this, can she guarantee that her government's priorities in the region will be peace and stability alone?
Secretary.
Well, it is exactly because we want peace and stability in the region that we supported the 20-point plan to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. As I previously said, that is still fragile and there is a huge amount of work still to do, including the humanitarian surge in support, including the decommissioning of weapons from Hamas. Huge amount of work still to do, but it's really important that the whole international community comes together in order to support that.
Sir Julian Lewis.
In March it will be the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership between Iran and China, an unholy alliance between religious fanatics and communist totalitarians who we are regrettably about to award a super embassy complete with secret dungeons in London. Can the Foreign Secretary tell me what estimate the government has made of the dependence of the Iranian regime's survival on its support from China, not least the huge exports of Iranian oil to China?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I would urge China to support the UN sanctions process that was triggered by the snapback that the UK, France and Germany instigated in October. It is essential that they do so because we have seen the pressure that is needed around the nuclear programme, something that affects all of our safety, is immensely important. I think not just China, but countries around the world should support that sanctions process.
Stefan Perot.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I am appalled by the actions of the murderous Iranian regime. But I'm deeply concerned that the financial secrecy of our overseas territories is enabling sanctions dodging. Can the Foreign Secretary assure me that she's doing everything she can to secure greater transparency in the overseas territories, to uphold the effect of international sanctions and end any complicity in the flow of blood money fueling this regime?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we have strongly pushed for greater transparency, including the overseas territories, and my honourable friend, the Minister for who covers the overseas territories, continues to do that with all of the overseas territories. What I would say is that the action that some of those territories have taken has actually been extremely important in implementing sanctions and has demonstrated what can be done and what can be achieved, and that's one of the reasons why we are determined to see the further progress around transparency more widely.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Iran have suffered for far too long, and they have made it clear enough is enough, and we stand with them. For too long, this government has remained largely silent on the oppression of Christians in the Middle East generally. Many countries, including Iran, murder and maim any person who does not conform to their dictated religion. Will the Minister assure this House, in her diplomatic efforts for peace in the region, she will prioritise religious freedom and the rights of Christians to exist and practice their religion without fear of persecution?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, it's exactly because we take so seriously the issues around freedom of belief. We have appointed a UK envoy exactly to keep pursuing this because it is so important. These are basic rights, basic part of our humanity for Christians, for people of all faiths and all religions, not just across the Middle East, but across the world.
That is the end of the statement on Iran.